Trujillo has been the laughing stock of the world on account of his vanity, his desire to be glorified. All that thing about his statues, his busts, his monuments to Trujillo, that has been his main weakness. The man is sick with power. He wants power and power and power, nothing else.
Rafael Leonidas Trujillo Molina, benefactor of the nation and father of his country, absolute ruler of the Dominican Republic.
Generalissimo, do you resent the word dictator?
No.
This is his story.
Brought to you by B.F. Goodrich.
I'm Bill Leonard, standing in front of one of the countless statues of Rafael Trujillo that dot the landscape of the Dominican Republic. For the next hour, you will see the country and the man. Most of the material filmed here in the Dominican Republic was made with the consent and observation of the Trujillo government. Some places and people were denied us. There was no censorship whatsoever of film once made.
On a recent Sunday morning, priests in every Roman Catholic church in the Dominican Republic rose to deliver a pastoral letter signed by 6 Dominican bishops. It told the people and it told the dictator, publicly, unmistakably, and for the first time in the 30-year Trujillo regime, that he had gone too far. For at that moment, suffering in Trujillo prisons were hundreds upon hundreds of men and women too, crushed at the brink of revolt. To understand why Dominicans finally stood up to be counted, and why the church rose too, one must look back at the turbulent flood of history from which Trujillo sprang. The Dominican Republic, originally called Santo Domingo, is redolent with history. Columbus landed here on his first trip, and here he built the first city in the New World. From this palace, Columbus's son Diego ruled the Western world. And from this very spot sailed the conquistadors, Ponce de Leon, Velasquez, Cortez, and Pizarro, pushing further west for further gold. But for the next 300 years, Santo Domingo became a forgotten backwash. Few spots on earth ever sank from greater grandeur to lower estate. The island's occupation forces included Spaniards and French, Haitians and British, pirates and pestilence, hurricanes and hate. And the United States Marines from 1916 to 1923. One of the products of the Marine occupation was a young Marine-trained officer named Trujillo. Cy Gittleman of Arizona, who met Trujillo as a young leatherneck, points up El Jefe's feelings about the Corps.
I want to tell you one thing, that he has never lost the pride of his having been associated with the Marine Corps. And he was just as proud of his uniform in those days as he is of the handsome uniforms he wears today.
By 1950, the paradox of Trujillo is that as he did violence to the standard of freedom, he raised the standard of living. By hook and by crook, 30 years of drive have raised annual per capita income from about $65 to $265. Still low by United States standards, but high by Latin American. A resident American businessman, Edward Pauley, remembers how it used to be.
Well, we used to come over here occasionally on a jaunt, young men, and the Dominican Republic was far behind Haiti in those days. Far behind Haiti. And what's been done here has all been done because of one man. There's no question about it. I think everybody will agree to that.
The fact that there's only one party doesn't bother you?
Well, it has a point for discussion, but it works. The people are happy. You go out in the country and damn it, the people are happy.
Trujillo took over what he described as a nation of men without land and land without men. His people were and are a mixture. A little Indian, a lot black, some Spanish. Almost as vigorously as Haiti emphasizes its African origins, Dominicans call attention to their Indian and Spanish ancestors. The capital city is likely to puzzle a tourist who comes armed with headlines. He lands at a spanking new jet airport. Travels to town on roads cynics say were built by Trujillo's gravel and concrete companies for Trujillo's private cars. Through a midtown lacking in either much bustle or much character, to a hotel of Miami proportions. He may note that vacation facilities have an unused look. Later, a tourist will also comment on the stillness of the streets, and if he drives far, will be annoyed by the ever-present police checkpoints that punctuate the road.
¿Quién call Ciudad Trujillo? Siga.
He soon learns sugar is the Dominican Republic's most important product, more than 800,000 tons last year. And more Dominicans work in sugar fields and sugar mills, like this huge one at Hyena, than for any other enterprise except the government. He'll be shown the much publicized but idle fairgrounds, built to celebrate the 25th year of the Trujillo regime, a party to which the world was boisterously invited in 1955, but to which few came. But beneath its antiseptic exterior, Santo Domingo bubbles with its own kind of fun and game. Cockfighting is eminently legal. So is gambling, including a lottery every Sunday. But baseball is the national game, sandlot and professional. The chosen few play polo. And no one is allowed to forget the merengue was born on the island. The Debs dance to it, so do the folks in another part of town. And naturally, the most popular merengue celebrates the Generalissimo in song. There is television, and virtually everyone goes to the movies. Ironically, while our cameras were there, Charlie Chaplin was playing in his classic satire about another dictator who didn't last half as long.
Trujillo!
So here is Herman Ornez, once the editor of Trujillo's leading newspaper.
He's a brilliant man, no question about that. Anyone who says that Trujillo is stupid is lying. Trujillo has a lot in his mind. He's it's a brilliant mind. He's a genius, even if he's a genius for evil.
Evil genius and far stronger words describing Trujillo can finally be heard inside the Dominican Republic, but only in off-the-record whispers behind closed doors. For every Dominican knows, those who oppose Trujillo go either to jail or away, where they can talk out loud, like exile Juan Diaz in New York.
Well, I won't kill Trujillo. That's a sure thing.
You would not?
No. I will hold him. To give an example not only to the Dominican people, but to all Latin American people and the world.
What would you do with him?
Well, I think I will keep him in jail and have an exhibition and make suffer my people.
Visitors to the Dominican Republic are given a pamphlet prepared by the local English language newspaper. It's called Why Dominicans Call Him El Benefactor. And it assumes, of course, that all of them do. The Generalissimo has done more to encourage the finer things in life than one might suspect. The Palace of Fine Arts houses a symphony orchestra, a dramatic group, a great deal of Dominican painting of varying quality, including those of a convicted leader of the latest revolutionary attempt, formerly a director of the museum. Trujillo boasts of a crash program to eliminate illiteracy. And free compulsory schooling, at grade school levels at least, is obviously no idle boast.
Alejandro el Grande.
Of course, the Generalissimo himself is number one on the primary educational agenda.
Generalísimo Trujillo.
Later, the bright ones, carefully screened, can go on to the oldest and yet one of the most modern universities in the Western Hemisphere. These very buildings house some of the most vehement of the rebels who now languish in prison. And perhaps this comes under the heading of education, too. One day, passing through the country town called Moca, we came upon this house and this couple. Does church mean a great deal to you, Maria?
¿Le interesa a usted, María, la iglesia, la cuestión religiosa?
Sí, me interesa porque yo me confieso y comulgo los viernes primero.
She is very interested because she goes to confession and she also takes communion on the
Más que yo la
first.
hermandad de esa imagen que está ahí.
And she venerates the picture you see on the wall there.
Of the Virgin Mary. But it's interesting that although you have 6 or 7 pictures of Generalissimo Trujillo, there is one of the Virgin Mary.
Se ve que tiene usted, por ejemplo, aquí como 6 o 7 fotografías del Generalísimo y sin embargo no tiene más que una estampa de la Virgen. ¿Eso qué significa? ¿Que tienen mayor interés en el Generalísimo? She says that it's more easy for her to obtain pictures of the Generalísimo. When she comes across one in a magazine, she cuts it out and sticks it up on her wall. It's easier for her to do that than to get pictures of the Virgin Mary, particularly this Virgin Mary, which is the one that she reveres.
But it doesn't mean that she reveres the Generalissimo above anybody in heaven or earth.
No quiere decir el hecho de que tenga tantas fotografías del jefe, no quiere decir que usted adora más al jefe que cualquier otra persona en la tierra y en el mundo, ¿no?
Sí.
¿Usted cree que sí, que adora más al Generalísimo? Yes, they think that, frankly, that they love the Generalísimo better than anything else.
Is he a kind of God to you?
¿Para ustedes el Generalísimo, el jefe, es como un dios?
Gracias.
Yes.
Most of the world was backing away from the Jewish refugee problem in 1939. But the Generalissimo opened his door, turned over free land in a seaside area called Sosua, and a Jewish colony has flourished there ever since. Sufferers under Hitler, paradoxically Trujillo's most enthusiastic boosters.
You lived under Hitler and know what a dictatorship can do. Isn't this fellow a dictator?
Who do you mean?
Mr. Trujillo.
Okay, let's take it the other way. He works for his people, and he has done a lot of for the people, and he is not a dictator in the sense of dictatorship. It's a kind of democracy, you know.
He didn't stop with Jews. Spanish settlers plow in the lovely Constanza mountain valley. And there are 2 settlements of Japanese, of which this family may be typical. Not so welcome are the Haitians, an easy source of labor on the same island. In 1937 border troubles, Trujillo troops slaughtered an estimated 12,000 Haitians, later paid reparations for the deed, $750,000 or $62.50 per Haitian. There is no color bar in the Dominican Republic, but the welcome wagon does not extend to neighboring blacks. Franklin Roosevelt is reported to have said of one Latin dictator, "I know he's an SOB, but he's our SOB." In a shrinking world in which the wave of the present has already toppled 5 Latin American strongmen, the United States may no longer be able to afford the luxury of embracing tyrants with any of the affection and aid extended to our new and old democratic friends. Trujillo is the closest, the oldest, and in many eyes the blackest of such men. What is the case against Rafael Trujillo? This is the trial of a handful of survivors of an attempt to overthrow the benefactor. News coverage, like every other aspect of life in the Dominican Republic, is at the absolute whim of Trujillo. Astonishingly enough, that whim allowed cameras in this courtroom. In 4 hours, far less time than it takes to pick most American juries, these men, pleading not guilty, were tried, convicted, and sentenced. As part of the same trial, the state also convicted Fidel Castro of Cuba, President Betancourt of Venezuela, among many others not present, to 30 years hard labor and $100,000 fines. This was not the first time that the long arm of Dominican justice has tried to reach beyond its borders to settle old scores. Many Americans remember as a landmark of Dominican justice a subway entrance on 57th Street in New York City, into which an anti-Trujillo Columbia University professor, Jesus de Galindez, may have disappeared. There is considerable evidence that on March 12, 1956, he was kidnapped, spirited to this airfield at Amityville, Long Island, and flown by a Dominican-employed pilot, Gerald Lester Murphy, to the Dominican Republic. Whether Galindez indeed met his end at the personal hand of Trujillo, as one report goes, or whether overzealous agents overplayed their hand, the disappearance of this Trujillo dissenter was in the great Trujillo tradition. Although many have accused Trujillo of the Galindez crime, former Ambassador Homero Hernandez is the first member of the Trujillo regime at that time to speak out.
Bueno, nuevo no puedo decir nada, solo que el pueblo dominicano...
There is nothing new I can add to what we know about Galindez. But the Dominican people know for a fact that Galindez was taken away from New York. He was punished personally by General Trujillo and finally assassinated.
Did you, as a member of the Trujillo government, ever hear anyone in the Trujillo government admit that this or something like it was done to Galindez?
Sí, cómo no.
I know that many people are aware of this fact, and then the person that told me is also dead.
Y me reservo su nombre a un muerto.
And I reserve to give you his name because even if he is dead, his family will be punished for sure in Santo Domingo.
What's happened to your family in the Dominican Republic and your wife's family since you defected?
Yo invertiría la pregunta y diría qué no le ha pasado a su familia y a la de su esposa después de haber renunciado.
I would reverse the question and I would say, what has not happened to my family and my wife's family since I resigned?
Pues, mis hermanos,
all my brothers are in jail. Some cousins are in jail. And one of my brothers-in-law has been declared gone, disappeared. Nobody knows where he is.
The Galindez case caused Trujillo such embarrassment that in 1957 he spent more than $250,000 solving it and hired the eminent lawyer Morris Ernst to investigate. Manuel de Moya, a top Trujillo aide, points to the results with pride.
We spend a great deal of money with people that have nothing to do with us, like, for example, the Ernst investigation. Ernst, who you know, is supposed to be known, is very well known as a liberal. And what did they found? That they were not guilty. Many people disappear in the United States all the time. You have a judge that disappeared in New York years ago. That is still a mystery.
Judge Crater.
Crater, yes. There is another judge that disappears in Chicago. And like that, thousands of people every day. You hear them over the radio every morning. I should say in Washington, where I used to live. So many people disappear every day.
If in some minds the Galindez case is still unsolved, there is no doubt the pilot, Gerald Murphy, an American, died in the Dominican Republic. And at least 5 other persons involved here and inside the Dominican Republic are now dead. Still very much alive, however, in Ciudad Trujillo is General Arturo Espaillat, facing the camera. Dominican consul in New York at the time Galindez disappeared, and widely represented as mastermind in the case. Espaillat refused to return to the United States to testify in response to a U.S. government subpoena. Another key figure in the Galindez affair and many other unsolved crimes of violence, Felix Bernardino, was still very close to the benefactor last December. But since this picture was made, barely survived a violent attack inside the Dominican Republic and is reported recovering in free Canada. Scores of others of even higher social standing were not so lucky, and this led the benefactor to apologize at a recent reception for a low-class guest list. All the best families, he said, are in jail. This report continues after a word from B.F. Goodrich. Trujillo has many chapters, the most heartbreaking of which concern reports of mass terror against his own people inside his country. Trujillo's internal spy network filters literally into every household and made possible the swift arrest of the estimated 1,500 persons jailed in the most recent plot. From the notorious La Victoria prison, which we were not allowed to photograph, came tales of savage beatings and torture, the least of which included men and women prisoners manacled together naked.
The most important qualities of Generalissimo is that he's very human. By that I mean he is a man who really gets intense when there is some trouble or problem with his friends or the people.
He's sentimental?
Very much so. Very sentimental.
Y es lo que él aspira.
Terror definitely is the only thing that keeps him in power, and that's what he wants to do. He wants to keep on in power through crimes in order to be able to do what he's been doing for the last 30 years.
The other countries of the Americas are well populated with Dominican exiles, but so are the little islands of diplomatic safety within Trujillo land, the foreign embassies. 13 men, women, children, and old people fled and found refuge here, the former Venezuelan embassy in Ciudad Trujillo. When Venezuela broke relations with Trujillo, the Ecuadorians took over this building. Trujillo has refused to give these people safe conduct out of the country. They have been there for more than a year. 17 others recently chose the day President Eisenhower was in Brazil to fight their way into the Brazilian embassy. This film, the last our CBS crew took inside the Dominican Republic, was made 4 hours after the firing stopped. If Trujillo has stolen his people's liberties, he has also taken onto himself some of their wealth. Cynics say his income is, in reality, the total income of his nation, and his capital, the country itself. But Homero Hernandez is more specific.
Have you ever been a part of, or have you ever specifically observed the method, if any, by which Trujillo takes money into his own pocket?
Pues muy fácilmente. Él hace una obra pública y le carga un 50% o un 100%.
Any of the public works that he does are overcharged from 50 to 100%.
Y esa suma inmediatamente se le entregan a Trujillo.
That amount, that 50 or 100% overage, it's then given to Trujillo personally.
How much money do you think he's made?
Yo le calculo sobre $800 millones.
I believe that he personally has $800 million. That's, of course, without counting the amounts of money that his immediate family has.
20% of the gross is the figure most often heard when the subject of graft comes up. One report reached the attention of the U.S. Congress of an American company that claimed income tax deductions for kickback money in the Dominican Republic. We asked Manuel de Moya about that.
Well, it is very simple to explain. If if a company comes here like it goes to England or it goes to the United States, they have the agents that they have to take care of. But they try to put us that it was a matter of the government. It is not the government. It's the American designated agents here in the country that get the benefit out of this.
I see. One of the Generalissimo's secrets may be that he has always plowed back his profits, kept most of them within the country for his people's pleasures or his own. He wishes, without much doubt, that he might have kept his children as close to hand. A daughter married 7 men, including Porfirio Rubirosa, perhaps the second best-known Dominican. His oldest son, Ramphus, failed the U.S. Command and General Staff College at Leavenworth, Kansas. His headlines have included anti-U.S. remarks and yachting parties with Hollywood stars. He is head of the Dominican Air Force and a lieutenant general at 30. One charge that virtually no one denies is that there is no freedom of the press. Ex-editor Herman Ornez tells what it was like.
Trujillo will dictate an editorial to me on anything. Let's suppose that you, Mr. Lerner, had gone to the Dominican Republic, and out of your visit to the Dominican Republic, you have written a journalistic account of the Dominican Republic, which Trujillo objected. He will call me and he will dictate to me an editorial attacking you, a man that maybe I respect a great deal. I will have no choice. The only thing that maybe I could do to that editorial was to put his bad grammar in place.
The Trujillo government is meticulous in providing a synthetic framework of democratic structures through which one man's will can be efficiently processed. Although there is a Congress and a Constitution, due process of law and government is a mockery and a monument to one man's total power. Perhaps this has been his greatest crime. You will meet Generalissimo Trujillo immediately after this word from Bell and Howell. Trujillo is easy to photograph. He's a familiar fixture at public functions. He's very accessible to visiting U.S. congressmen, to foreign businessmen with enticing propositions, and even occasionally to newspaper reporters. But no ruler has been more careful about exposing himself to that combination of sight and sound, TV. Arranging a television appearance for the Generalissimo was a 6-month merry-go-round. Reports, Trujillo, Portrait of a Dictator, continues after this word from Bell and Howell. Reporters returning from the Dominican Republic used to be asked, what's Trujillo really like? Now the question has changed to, how much longer can Trujillo stay in power? For he is the last of the powerful Latin American tyrants. Wave after wave of popular reform sweeps country after country. Ferment is the mood and change the order of the day. Trujillo, once a phenomenon, has become an anachronism. Even to his most intimate advisors, the pressures are evident. Robert Johnson, his American intelligence analyst.
There is change. There always has to be change. You see, here is a people who are still not fighting for the status quo, but fighting for the better standard of living. And that's important to realize, because Americans tend to struggle for that status quo. In other words, I believe that if this country was further advanced along and was satisfied and had a full belly, had a TV set, that there would be a hell of a lot more ferment than there is now. But the idea that they would rather sweat than bleed is what governs society here. As for being an island, it is an island, and it's been a strong point in warding off all this infection. You also have a strong leader here. I don't have to tell you that. Whether or not any nation can remain isolated from a turbulent sea of violence like the Caribbean is another question.
Trujillo is in trouble. So far, he has survived 2 political shock waves and an economic artillery barrage. First, last June, an ill-fated invasion attempt by our our standards of the comic opera variety. One Cuban-based plane landed here. 56 men, many Dominican-born, fought in these hills for a few weeks. Only a handful survived. This was the last man captured, the notorious Major Delio Ochoa. This man captured him. The peasants greeted the invaders with machetes, not open arms. 2 boatloads of men tried a sea landing at a beach near this one. There were no survivors. Since then, the country has been on constant military alert. Trujillo hastily reinforced his army, already large by Caribbean standards, to the tune of an estimated $50 million, hard cash he could ill afford. For at the same time, drought decimated the sugar, cocoa, rice, and coffee crops, even as world prices crumbled. The once proud Dominican balance of exports over imports vanished. Construction projects have been halted. The knife of depression has begun to cut. Meanwhile, anti-Trujillo pressures outside the country increase. Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Venezuela have virtually boycotted the Dominican Republic. Their leaders make no secret how they feel. Governor Muñoz Marin of Puerto Rico.
We in Puerto Rico are decidedly against all forms of dictatorship, and the dictatorship that the people of Santo Domingo, the good people of Santo Domingo, have been suffering for the last 30 years, are believed to have been the worst in the American hemisphere.
And U.S. Congressman Charles O. Porter, Democrat, Oregon, keeps up the pressure.
The bloody black era of Trujillo is nearly ended. Dominicans, where they are permitted to raise their heads, can see a growing light on the horizon. The United States will not send the Marines to help the revolution, nor to protect Trujillo. All that the United States should do is remember, audibly and proudly, that we were born out of a revolution against a tyrant. We do not interfere in the internal affairs of sister states. That does not mean we have to soft pedal our deepest traditions, our most sacred beliefs.
The growing army of Dominican exiles and Trujillo haters of half a dozen political and national hues step up there, pounding at the dictator's iron door. He's saying, as Latin states, we have to say to all free men of America, help us to get rid of the chains of oppression. But more important than rhetoric, early this year, Trujillo's own people, so neatly under thumb for so long, defected. A burgeoning underground spearheaded by the younger generation of the Republic's best families, doctors, lawyers, students, priests, planned to get Trujillo from within. They were chopped down, literally by the hundreds, in a wave of mass arrests touching almost every family in the nation. It was this terror that triggered the Catholic Church's strong pastoral letter, which told Trujillo unmistakably he had lost his last important friend. Historically in Latin America, when the church turns against dictators, they fall. In Ciudad Trujillo, Dominican Bishop Thomas Riley tells how and why it happened.
But we've also been troubled by some shadow aspects of this regime. And finally, we had come to the conclusion that the situation had gone to such lengths, to such excesses, that we had no choice but to affirm in a very forceful fashion the essential human rights. The right of a man to his own life, that God is the one who gives our life, and only God can take away our life. The right to live with some sense of security, the right to converse freely, the right to live in an environment that is not an environment of servile fear. So our letter appeared at the last day of the month.
Trujillo may now have few defenders left in the United States, but the argument that although he is a dictator, he is our dictator, has its 1960 pleaders. This is Senator George Smathers, Democrat, Florida, who went to see Trujillo during the current crisis.
Do you think we should behave differently toward Trujillo than Castro?
Well, I would say that there is this big difference. First,
the Trujillo government, while a dictatorship and a cruel, tough dictatorship, it's always been a government that has been friendly to the United States. Now, with respect to Castro's government has, from the very start, evidenced it did not care to work with the United States. Actually, it was anti-United States. The many statements and speeches which Castro and his ministers have made, which are all anti-United States.
Senator, what did Trujillo specifically tell you he would do to democratize the Dominican Republic?
He said he would have elections within the cities of the Dominican Republic within 15 months, that he would have elections nationwide within 2 years. He further agreed that none of the Trujillos would run after I had told him that if they did, no matter what the actual outcome was, people would get the idea it was not an honest election. He said none of them would run. On top of that, he stated that he would invite all the exiles who were out of the country to come back and participate, that they could have a multi-party election. On top of that, he agreed that the OAS or some similar international organization could come in and should come in to supervise the election.
But, Senator, isn't it true that although this was publicized all over the United States, none of this appeared in the Dominican press?
That's absolutely true. I didn't know it at the time, but they have not been printed. And I must say that sort of shook me up, because immediately after having this conversation with the Generalissimo, I went out and had a press conference at which there were in attendance a number of Dominican reporters. But my belief is, and it's been represented to me, that Trujillo is desirous of making this announcement at the opening of his own session of Congress in his own way, where he wants to make a very big deal and take a lot of fanfare along with it.
Trujillo had become Chief of Staff of the new National Army. The Marines had long since departed. With a reputation as a hard worker, smooth schemer, tough disciplinarian. He shed his first wife, married into a better family, moved into the arena of political plotting and intrigue. And in August 1930 was unanimously elected president. Significantly, all his original opponents either gave up their candidacy or their lives by election morning. The domain he years, Trujillo has become more controversial, has generated more headlines than any small nation ruler on earth. The unhappy pomp and circumstance is part of the show in Trujillo land. Not only because he enjoys it, but also because he thinks the people enjoy it. The wedding of his puppet president brother to the daughter of an old American Marine pal, Colonel Charles McLaughlin, had everything but a Marie Antoinette tossing cake to the crowd at the palace gates. But Trujillo's heirs have apparently inherited mostly those qualities that may make him ridiculous. Not a Dominican considers his sons could carry on. But the old man cannot be dismissed on the basis of a rather preposterous public image. Not even his enemies would say that. For example, in Puerto Rico, round of refusals, half-promises, and sudden alerts, filtered down through layers of palace guards, bent on shielding him from bullets on the one hand and criticism on the other. But one morning, the word came. Get set and ready to go at the legendary Trujillo Cattle Ranch, breeding station, and country retreat called Fundación, near his birthplace, Cristobal. The stern warning to make sure no strong lights flashed in the face of El Jefe was the only hint that this would be more than just another chance to see the great star shining in a different part of his sky. The benefactor was in a benevolent mood, and although interview is surely not the word for what followed, we were allowed to be present for a catch-as-catch-can performance, with Manuel de Moya supplying the English.
Can I take a moment to ask you just one or two questions about the future of the Dominican Republic and the whole Caribbean area?
Mientras aquí en el Caribe hayan dos bandoleros internacionales, Fidel Castro y Rómulo Betancourt, habrá inquietud y peligro en el Caribe.
His Excellency said that while here in the Caribbean there will subsist two individuals that are practically madmen like Betancourt and Fidel Castro, the Caribbean area will be in a very suspicious way.
Do you think any meeting at the Caribbean Summit would do anything to reduce tensions in the Caribbean?
La reunión del Caribe? No creo, no creo.
He doesn't believe that.
Fidel Castro es un loco.
Fidel Castro is a crazy man, he's a madman, he's just unreliable, really, in other words.
Y él dice que para que la revolución cubana triunfara tiene que conquistar Santo Domingo.
And Fidel Castro says that for the Cuban Revolution to be a complete success, it has to be destroying our government and our country.
No lo va a conquistar nunca.
And he'll never realize the dreams of him.
How about the economic progress of and the future of the Dominican Republic in 20, 25 years from now?
República Dominicana, que es un país pequeño, que en el año 30, cuando yo ascendí al poder, tenía un presupuesto de 9 millones, ahora lo tiene 150 millones.
His Excellency said that the
y tal vez 200 millones.
His Excellency said that all of the Dominican Republic is a very small little country. That when he became in power, there was have a budget, national budget of 7 million. Now we have a budget of 150, and probably, very sure, will go as high as 200.
Y que pagamos la deuda externa.
And we have paid the external debt, so we don't have any external debt.
Y ya dentro de 25 años yo habré desaparecido.
And naturally he expects, and we hope not, that he, within 25 years, he'll be gone, at least from the political
leader.
scene, yes.
Y no creo que ellos, los dominicanos, quieran trabajar hacia atrás. Siempre de frente.
And he's sure and positive
no creo que sean tan pendejos para trabajar hacia
atrás. He's sure that the Dominican people will not go back. That since this period of prosperity and hard working, they wouldn't go back, they go forward.
They will go forward.
Yes.
So consequently, the future of the Dominican Republic is very bright.
Do you think that we in the United States have been unfair in our attitudes toward the Dominican Republic in the press or other ways?
Come on, my friend.
Si usted considera que la actitud de los Estados Unidos, sobre todo en la cuestión de la prensa y la actitud del gobierno, ha sido desfavorable para nosotros.
Siempre.
Always.
Después de la muerte de Roosevelt, Correjor, todos han sido enemigos nuestros. Contrario,
that after the death of President Roosevelt, as well as Secretary, everybody that have come into power in the United States have been our enemies.
Todos contrarios, todos.
Generalissimo, do you resent the word dictator?
No. Yo soy un trabajador. Y mi pueblo sabe eso.
His Excellency said that he doesn't resent that word whatsoever. Because what he is a hard-working man, and the people and our country, our citizens knows that he's a hard-working man. So consequently, what he done is the benefit for the country.
Esa dictadura es una especulación de los enemigos.
This word of dictator is a speculation word created by his enemies.
Yes.
Generalissimo, can you imagine any circumstances in which the Dominican Republic would invade any other Caribbean country?
De aquí para allá, jamás.
From here
La Constitución Dominicana lo prohíbe.
From here to any country, impossible, because the first thing is this, our Constitution forbids that we do intervene in any foreign country.
Well, of all the things you've done in the last 30 years, Generalissimo, what are you proudest of?
Las obras que más me enorgullecen a mí son aquellas que favorecen a los pobres.
His accomplishments that make him more prouder are the ones that have been for the benefit of the poor classes.
Is he concerned about the threat of communism? Is it a real threat?
Es una amenaza real, pero no me preocupa a mí. Porque cada vez que se meten conmigo, los voy a batir y llevarán el polvo de la derrota aquí en Santo Domingo.
Actually, I say that nationally it is a threat for the Caribbean, but not for this country, because every time, because if they ever dare to come here, they'll swallow the dust of the rout. I mean, they'll be routed and with the dust of disaster.
Yes. What about American attitudes and behavior toward Latin American countries?
Yo no quiero meterme en la cuestión americana. Es Norteamérica. Lo han hecho muy mal.
Essentially, it doesn't want to go any further than these affairs of because you have done a very bad job.
A fellow who owns the country, the cattle, and the cars gets used to owning the reporter. And if the questions begin to warm up a little, why bother with no comment? You just walk away. But later, while frolicking around his hacienda and petting his prize livestock, the benefactor sounded off in several directions, some of them interesting in light of future development. Retirement. You'll know I've retired when you hear that I'm dead. The Cuban sugar quota. Unfair. The problems of his regime. There are no problems, economic problems here in our country now, whatsoever. The U.S. hasn't made a right move since Roosevelt and Hull left the scene. But neither expansive on-camera performances, nor reassurances in the press, nor denunciations of other Latin American figures could hide the fact that the tough little Caribbean Caesar was up against it as never before. At the moment these pictures were made, the bitter tea of revolution was brewing. Object? Get Trujillo. CBS put on a spontaneous solidarity parade, urging the Generalissimo, and only the Generalissimo, to run for president in 1962, the year he has promised free elections. At the peak of the national sorrow and unrest, he put himself within pot-shot of his people. The demonstration was promptly boycotted by the priests, including the papal ambassador, and by 3/4 of the foreign diplomatic corps, including the United States ambassador. How long can Trujillo last? Predictions are not our business. But one source within his government said not even a Trujillo can survive another major shock. So far, a loyal army and secret police, always the key, has kept the order, if not the peace. To our certain knowledge, the decimated underground is now without arms, without much organization, but not without hope. As one of them told us, after all, we are only a heartbeat from freedom. Even pessimists talk in terms of months instead of years. But the toughest question of all, after Trujillo, what? If dictatorship creates a vacuum, what fills it and how? For in the classic tradition, Trujillo has made no plans for a tomorrow without himself. Two versions of the future. From Manuel de Moya,
he has shown to us what a man can do for a country that we are more or less used to. And not only used, but we feel that we need a man of his caliber to guide us all the time.
And Herman Ornat.
I don't think that the Dominicans will want a strong man any longer. I think that the only alternative to the Trujillo regime eventually will have to be a democratic regime, a regime of freedom.
And from inside Trujillo's palace, Robert Johnson is realistic.
What do you think's going to happen here when the chief retires or if he should die? A lot of people have tried to answer that question and don't know the answer. Think you do?
No, I don't either.
No one knows. But Dominican dungeons are filled with men who are willing to die to find the answer. For them, what follows Trujillo must not be a Castro, a communist, or another Trujillo. And surely the tides of recent history must have shown Americans that we can no longer regard events in the Caribbean as a spectator sport. Good night.
CBS Reports has been brought to you by Bell & Howell, creators of a new world of Zoom. Zoom movie cameras and Zoom projectors. Finer products through imagination.